The magnetic field of the Earth has been weakening at an alarming rate. This suggests that a polar reversal is overdue. A weakening magnetic field makes the Earth more vulnerable to the impact of solar activities. The intensity and frequency of solar activities are likely to increase from now until 2025. This will make the Earth more vulnerable to three major instantaneous flooding scenarios. The baseline scenario suggests that there will be more intense and frequent hurricanes to make more coastal areas flood-prone. The best-case scenario suggests that an extreme amount of solar radiation can melt all ice on Earth to inundate a large area from Gulf of Mexico to the confluence of Mississippi River and Ohio River. The worst-case scenario can flood the entire eastern half of the United States with large tidal waves from polar reversal. During the third geodesign game, you will have the opportunities to generate a climate adaptation plan using suitability analysis, multi-systems reconciliation, strength-weakness opportunity threat analysis, cost-benefit analysis, performance modeling, and multi-systems optimization.
Our design framework consists of two major flooding events, solar storm flooding and polarity reversal. Both of these can cause flooding at a catastrophic level. If this were to happen, approximately 264 million people will be displaced and urged to relocate in the Midwestern region. Indigenous reservations comprise 56.2 million acres of land in the United States. Many of these cultural lands have high poverty rates, poor health care, and low quality of education. It is critical to create all-inclusive evacuation and relocation hubs. Selecting areas for Job Corps sites that are in close proximity to these native lands will increase the flow of revenue and create jobs for millions of people that are displaced. During the geodesign network and continental collaboration, these teams selected areas that would be best for habitat preservation and suitability for site development. As the data was compiled, we have taken into account the flooding disasters and narrowed down to feasible options. With this information, we have selected evacuation sites and relocation cities that would be at a high enough elevation that they would be minimally impacted by the flooding events and in close proximity to Job Corps sites, evacuation routes, military bases, and spaceports, which would aid in our emergency evacuation if the flooding were to worsen beyond this level.
Starting from the left is the major flooding event, which is solar storm and polar reversal flooding. Below that is a consensus for habitat preservation for monarch butterflies from the geodesign games. Moving on is the major rivers in Texas, which will be used as evacuation routes for the occurrence of solar storm and polar reversal flooding. The last infograph shows the population for the areas we are focusing on. This brings us to the regional consensus, which shows where and which cities are going to be the evacuation centers and relocation cities.
The Evacuation Center is located in Mesa County, Colorado. When choosing a suitable site, it was imperative to select a site outside of the polar reversal and solar flooding areas, while keeping in mind areas that are more vulnerable to solar storms. This led to the selection of Colorado since it was close to a military base and space hub. We analyzed the structure and road suitability in addition to flooding and erosion vulnerability. After combining these criteria, we found the ideal site location in Grand Junction, Colorado, right off the Colorado River.
When designing our evacuation center, we wanted it to be completely self-sufficient and sustainable while meeting the needs of the vulnerable people being brought to the site. After extensive research on creating a self-sufficient site, we proposed a prototype toolkit broken down into the objectives of renewable energy, human infrastructure, essential nutrition, and transportation. Our site includes 6 housing pods with a central medical hub and transportation hub connected by elevated walkways and an autonomous rail line. The medical hub is located in the center of our campus in order to ensure equal access from all areas. Traditionally, people at the socioeconomic bottoms without the financial resources to evacuate or relocate are hit the hardest in emergency events such as large-scale flooding. We included a public transportation system and helicopter system to efficiently serve those who cannot evacuate or relocate on their own. We realized that there will be a lot of trauma occurring before the occupants get to our hub, so we wanted to provide extensive green spaces connecting all the housing pods to the medical hub to help with mental health and PTSD. Phase 1 can be immediately implemented with a transportation hub, 2 housing pods, and 1 green room, and the medical hub with elevated walkways connecting them all. Phase 1 has a holding capacity of 200,000 people. By Phase 2, there will be an additional 2 housing pods and 2 green roofs, leading to a total holding capacity of 400,000 people. The final phase will add the last 2 housing pods and 2 green roofs and an autonomous rail line connecting all housing pods with the transportation hub with a total capacity of 600,000 people.
Our wind turbine farm consists of 40 turbines and will produce about 263 million kilowatt hours annually. With this implementation, we will reduce our site's carbon emissions by 120,000 tons annually. We are also adding 424,000 square feet of solar panels that can produce about 9,636,000 kilowatt hours annually. The use of solar panels will yield a 99% decrease in carbon emission compared to traditional electricity. On-site water harvesting from our green roof has the capacity to yield about 26 million gallons a year and will be used in our vertical farms for food production. Our modular housing pods and circular layout is intended to promote inclusivity and familiarity. Additionally, in the event of a pod being compromised, we can easily move refugees to another pod in the campus using the interwoven walks and corridors. This allows us to isolate and adapt to worst-case solar storm scenarios.
Starting in the year 2025, initial impacts take place in the coastal zones of the U.S., including Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Those who need to be evacuated will be taken to the evacuation hub located in Mesa, Colorado. As the U.S. becomes more flooded in 2050, there will be gas pipeline explosions in existing Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, which causes high radiation and major pollution. People will be relocated to New Mexico to the floating city that serves as the relocation destination. In the year 2100, the percentage of sea level rise reaches over 85%, consuming the majority of the U.S., leaving it completely inhabitable.
Coastal cities are at an extreme threat from sea level rising and polar reversals. These events will result in major flooding to most of the United States. That being said, our goal is to create a more resilient future for all of the residents around the United States by preparing and planning for these catastrophic events that are to come. We are building amphibious cities for people to be able to sustainably live on the water upon being relocated from the evacuation hub, which is located in Grand Junction, Colorado. We plan to create very well-rounded, closed-loop amphibious cities that are 100% functional and livable. The site we chose is on Huron Lake in New Mexico. Lake Huron was found to be a suitable site that met the required criteria based on the results of our studies and geodesign game outcomes. The amphibious city has many different features to serve the people, such as plant-based food systems that highly involve hydroponic farming. There are also well-thought-out plans for energy use and closed-loop net-zero energy systems. These closed-loop systems make the prototype very energy efficient, making for a sustainable place to live and reside for long periods of time. We also plan to include and incorporate means for transportation within the villages, along with transportation to and from the prototype itself. Within the city, there will be living space, job spaces, and much more. Our amphibious city as a whole is capable of holding 50,000 people. Thank you for listening.
There has been conflict along the southern border of the United States for generations. Our proposed plan for the Rio Grande watershed region that stretches from southern Colorado to northern Mexico will work to increase binational commerce, resource conservation, and inundation mitigation. Our phases promote resilient retrofitting by 2025, decarbonization by 2050, and interplanetary connectivity by 2100. Extreme inundation events will be mitigated by natural arroyos that will protect vulnerable populations and retain runoff.
Fort Stockton will become a transitional home for climate refugees. To facilitate the transportation of these climate migrants, Interstate 10 will be retrofitted as a high-speed rail to connect major population centers. Within Fort Stockton, an intra-city magnet train will reduce reliance on residents' personal vehicles, create a network of parks and green space, and provide access to rocket launch sites. These launch sites will allow for a last resort evacuation from the planet. Each of these infrastructure plans will be constructed in phases with milestones in 2025, 2050, and completion by the year 2100.
The primary focus for the El Paso Relocation Center is rebuilding a community for people that have migrated from areas affected by climate disaster. The goal for the relocation hub is to create a self-sufficient community that utilizes clean energy like algae biofuel, wind and solar, water reuse, rainwater catchment, and efficient public transportation. Proximity to the Franklin Mountains and the cultivated cropland serve as a critical flyover and roost site for migratory species. The use of geomagnetic beacons will also redirect these species from the affected areas. In addition, the site utilizes earthen materials for housing, an architecture that pays homage to the region's ancient cultural history. This design aims to encourage unity within our binational sister city initiative.